In part 3 of the Metamorphosis, badly injured by the apple lodged in his insectoid flesh, Gregor can no longer scurry about his room. Instead, he crawls strenuously and languishes in his room all day. And all the members of his family work now, leaving the door to the living room open in the evening, enabling Gregor to watch and listen. And most evenings have become quiet. After dinner, his father falls asleep in his chair, still wearing his job uniform. His mother works steadily on her sewing projects, fancy underwear for a retail store. And his sister, following a full day of work in a sales job, studies shorthand and French. But despite their jobs, the Samsas can't maintain their former standard of living, cutting expenses by getting rid of their full-time live-in maid, instead hiring a cleaning lady, called a Charwoman, to come in the mornings and evenings. Gregor watches as dust and dirt pile up in his bedroom, which his sister no longer maintains. At one point, his mother brings in a bucket of water and cleans Gregor's room. The dampness makes Gregor sick, and Grete angrily chastises her mother for taking on added work, insisting she was never to clean Gregor's room again. Gregor cannot understand why his family don't just ask the Charwoman to clean it. She isn't put off by Gregor and enters his room whenever she feels like it. She even speaks directly to Gregor, calling him an old dung beetle, and doesn't back down when he hisses and arches his back at her. Soon, Gregor stops eating, is covered with dust and debris, and is overcome with sadness and pain from his injury. His family takes on 3 boarders to help make ends meet. Because the boarders bring their own furniture, the family crams many of their own pieces into Gregor's ever more cluttered room. Gregor is incredibly sad and lonely, but he perks up one evening at the sound of Greata's violin. The 3 boarders listen with interest as Gregor crawls trepidatiously from his room to take in the performance. Lost in his own imagination midst the reverie, one of the boarders spots Gregor. Shocked, the boarders demand an explanation from Gregor's father. In a panic, Mr. Samsa shields his son from their view and attempts to corral the boarders back into their room, refusing to explain the presence of the strange insect-like creature. But the boarders, fed up with the strange behavior, give notice of their departure due to the repugnant conditions that prevail in this flat and with this family. They say they will not pay for a single day stayed in the Samsa home. Mr. Samsa sinks into a state of despair. Grete pleads with her parents, "I don't want to call this monster my brother. All I can say is we have to try and get rid of it." Gregor makes his way back to his room. Grete closes and locks the door immediately, and Gregor falls into a state of empty and peaceful rumination. Soon after a clock tower strikes 3, he draws his last breath and dies. The next morning, the Charwoman shouts out to the sleeping parents and sister that it's dead, just lying there, stone dead. His family comes together to observe Gregor's body. When the boarders awaken to demand breakfast, Mr. Samsa tells them to leave at once. The Samsas decide to take a day off from work, realizing that not only had they earned a break from work, but they were in serious need of it. They catch a tram to the country for fresh air and sunshine, and make plans to move to a less expensive flat. The family recognizes what good fortune it is that all 3 of them have good jobs. Mr. and Mrs. Samsa also realize that Greata, who is blossoming into a well-built and beautiful young lady, will likely soon marry. Gregor might be badly injured, but his despair mainly comes from his inability to provide for his family. He spends his days and nights worrying about them and watching them go through the motions of dinner, too tired to engage each other in conversation and doing their best just to get through it. Even though they work hard, the family struggles to make ends meet, reflecting Franz Kafka's critique of life and work in the modern world. Gregor longs for his family's appreciation, love, and attention. Instead, he gets the Charwoman barging in on him unannounced, and his parents and sister spending their off hours taking care of 3 boarders instead of their loving son and brother who supported them all those years. The only thing pulling Gregor out of his stupor is the sound of his sister playing the violin. Gregor reflects that he is the only one who truly appreciates Greata's talent. This leads him to question whether a mere giant bug should be able to appreciate such fine music. Here, Kafka may be commenting on the ability of art to make one human, even as modern life wears away at one's humanity. Grete transitions from tending to her brother with a certain amount of care and pity to viewing him as a nuisance and burden to the family. When she starts referring to her brother as an it, it's clear to Grete Gregor is not a human being, but the cause of their misery. After Gregor's death, the perspective shifts from Gregor to the trio of Mr. Samsa, Mrs. Samsa, and Grete. Spring has arrived, symbolizing the Samsa family's hope for a better future and their readiness to move on. A bittersweet sense of relief falls over them. Now, they only have to care for themselves. As the story ends, the Samsa family, for the first time, seems happy. They do what Gregor was never able to do. Take a day off to relax and unwind. The family's eagerness to downsize the flat that Gregor worked so hard to maintain is one of the story's many ironies. Gregor changed from a traveling salesman to an insect, but his family also changed. His father no longer relies on his son to provide for them. His mother is far more at peace, and Grete is now a responsible woman who will soon set off on a life of her own.